My parents said, "We spent 95% of your savings to buy your sister's lakefront villa." My sister mocked me. "You don't have a single penny left," but I burst out laughing because they didn't know that those savings were. I still remember the exact moment my entire understanding of family shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. It was a chilly Tuesday evening in Neepville, the kind of quiet, aggressively normal suburban night where absolutely nothing monumental is ever supposed to happen. The streetlights outside were casting long, yellowish shadows across the manicured lawns, and inside, the house smelled faintly of pot roast and old vanilla air freshener. I was sitting in my childhood living room, staring across the same scratched oak coffee table where I had spent endless mornings doing algebra homework as a teenager. Now, at 28 years old, I was clutching a mug of lukewarm black coffee, feeling the tension in the room wrap around my throat like a heavy, suffocating wool scarf. Sitting directly across from me on the faded floral sofa were my parents. They looked incredibly small in that moment, older and far more fragile than I ever wanted to admit. My dad was avoiding my gaze completely. He had his shoulders hunched forward, shifting his weight uncomfortably and staring with intense, fabricated interest at the frayed fringe of the living room carpet. My mom kept aggressively twisting her silver wedding band around her left ring finger, her chest rising and falling with nervous, shallow breaths that she was trying desperately to hide. And then, dominating the space, there was Morgan. My older sister, Morgan, was 32 years old and chronically allergic to hard work, personal accountability, or any situation where she wasn't the absolute center of attention. She was lounging in my dad's favorite leather armchair like she owned the entire house. She was dressed in a pristine, cream-colored designer matching lounge set that probably cost more than my first used car. Her legs were crossed, and her freshly manicured acrylic nails tapped a chaotic rhythm against her expensive phone case. Unlike our parents, she didn't look nervous at all. She looked like a cat that had just swallowed a canary, digested it, and was sitting there waiting for the feathers to burp out. "Blair, sweetie," my mom finally started, breaking the suffocating silence. Her voice cracked right down the middle, a pathetic, wavering sound. "We asked you to come over because we have to talk to you about your savings account." The air in the room instantly grew heavy, thick with an impending disaster. I didn't say anything. I just waited, letting the dead silence force her to continue. I knew from years of therapy that jumping in to save them from their own awkwardness was exactly how they manipulated me. My dad finally cleared his throat, looking up at me with eyes that pleaded for an understanding I already knew I wasn't going to give. "You remember last year, Blair? When you had that awful knee surgery and the complications kept you in the rehab center for almost a month. You gave us temporary emergency access to your banking portal so we could pay your utility bills and manage your rent while you were recovering." I nodded slowly, keeping my face completely blank. Of course I remembered. I had signed a temporary authorization form while half-sedated on pain medication. It was a standard gesture of trust. When I got better and threw myself back into my 70-hour work weeks, I had just forgotten to revoke their administrative access. It was my parents. You are supposed to trust your parents not to financially assassinate you. Well, my mom interrupted, tears welling up in her eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were from genuine guilt or just the fear of my reaction. "We accessed your account again. 2 days ago. We had to do it, Blair. We didn't have a choice. It was an absolute emergency. An emergency." I looked slowly over at Morgan. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't dying. She was just sitting there with a condescending smirk playing on the corner of her perfectly glossed lips, radiating absolute entitlement. "What exactly kind of emergency requires logging into a bank account that doesn't belong to you?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like a stranger, detached and analytical. My dad let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, rubbing his face with his calloused hands like he was the one carrying the weight of the world. "Your sister needed stability, Blair. She's had a really rough few years bouncing around. But she finally found her dream home. A beautiful lakefront villa up near Lake Geneva. It's the perfect place for her to settle down and finally get her life on a solid track." But her credit score wasn't quite good enough for a traditional approval, and she didn't have the liquid cash for the down payment. So, my mom chimed in, rushing her words together as if saying them faster would somehow lessen the devastating blow. We used your savings to help her secure the property. We withdrew $85,000 for the down payment and the closing costs. We know it's 95% of what you had in there, but family helps family, Blair. We will pay you back eventually, we promise. We just couldn't let Morgan lose this once-in-a-lifetime house. I sat completely frozen on the couch. $85,000. Gone. Funneled directly into a luxury lakefront property for a woman who hadn't held a steady, tax-paying job since the Obama administration. They hadn't asked me for a loan. They hadn't even hinted at borrowing it. They had utilized old, forgotten medical permissions to bypass digital security and financially gut me just to buy my sister a vacation mansion. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I was processing the sheer audacity of what they had just confessed. My own parents had stolen from me to fund my sister's delusions of grandeur. Morgan finally decided to join the conversation, uncrossing her legs and leaning forward with a look of absolute, unadulterated triumph on her face. She loved this. She thrived on this exact dynamic. For her entire life, she had viewed my financial stability and professional success as a personal insult to her chaotic, disorganized lifestyle. Dragging me down made her feel elevated. Don't look so intensely tragic, Blair, Morgan sneered, waving a manicured hand in the air dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. You've always been a neurotic workaholic hoarder. You never even spend your money on anything fun. You just sit on it like some greedy dragon in a cave. Besides, you don't have a single penny left now anyway, so you might as well learn how to live simply. Like the rest of us normal people. Her words hung heavily in the stale air. You don't have a single penny left. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't pick up my ceramic coffee mug and hurl it across the room at her smug face, even though the violent urge to do so was definitely pulsing through my veins. Instead, my hands moved with mechanical, practiced precision. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket, used my thumbprint to unlock it, and opened my mobile banking application. The screen illuminated my face in the dim living room lighting. I navigated straight to the savings account they were talking about. The screen refreshed. The bright green digital numbers loaded against the white background. Just yesterday, that balance had proudly displayed $95,000. Today, it read just over $10,000. The withdrawal history was right there, sitting in plain sight, a massive, single-wire transfer authorized by my father's user token, routed directly to an escrow company in Wisconsin. I stared at the screen for exactly 5 seconds. I looked at the numbers, letting the reality of their betrayal wash over me. And then, something broke deep inside me. Or maybe, something finally clicked perfectly into place. I started to laugh. It started as a low, rumbling chuckle in the back of my throat, a sound of pure disbelief. But it quickly bubbled up into a full-blown, hysterical roar. My laughter echoed loudly off the popcorn ceiling of the Neepville living room. It was an uncontrollable, dark, and utterly manic sound. I threw my head back and laughed until my stomach muscles ached and hot tears streamed out of the corners of my eyes, ruining my mascara. The reaction in the room was instantaneous. The smug, victorious expression drained entirely out of Morgan's face, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. She sat up straight, her eyes darting frantically between me and our parents, trying to figure out the joke. My mom pressed both of her hands against her mouth, looking at me with wide eyes like I had suddenly suffered a psychotic break. My dad half-stood from the sofa, holding his hands out in a desperate, placating gesture. Blair, my dad stammered, his voice trembling. Blair, honey, please calm down. Take a breath. We know you're upset about the money. Upset? I gasped, trying to catch my breath, wiping a tear of pure mirth from my cheek with the back of my hand. Oh, Dad. You are so wrong. I'm not upset at all. I actually think this is the funniest thing that has happened in my entire life. I stood up from the sofa, dropping my phone back into my pocket with a smooth motion. The laughter had faded into a wide, icy smile that felt permanently glued to my face. I looked at the three of them. I looked at the parents who had just casually admitted to stealing my life savings to coddle their 32-year-old golden child. I looked at the sister who truly believed she had just ruined my financial future. "Enjoy the lakefront villa, Morgan," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or familial affection. "I sincerely hope it brings you absolutely everything you deserve." I didn't wait for a single response. I turned on my heel, walked out the front door into the crisp, biting night air, and got straight into my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, leaving my childhood home in the rearview mirror, the smile dropped from my face. I let out a long, shaky breath, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They honestly thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had successfully drained 5 years of my blood, sweat, and absolute sacrifice. They had no idea. They had absolutely no clue that the $85,000 they had just stolen was nothing more than a carefully constructed digital trap, a decoy account. And they had walked right into it, blindly and greedily. To truly understand why I didn't lose my mind and violently assault someone in that Neepville living room, you have to understand the 5 brutal, exhausting years that came before that Tuesday night. I wasn't just hoarding cash in a bank account for the fun of looking at big numbers. That money represented my literal blood, sweat, and absolute, agonizing isolation from the rest of the world. Right out of college, armed with a degree I had paid for entirely through scholarships and waitressing, I landed a job as a junior software engineer down in Chicago's Loop District. While my peers from university were out spending their starting corporate salaries on overpriced happy hour cocktails, expensive downtown gym memberships, and weekend trips to Miami, I was grinding my bones to dust. 60-hour work weeks were my baseline minimum. I took on every extra coding project, volunteered for every agonizing weekend debugging session, and picked up every single holiday shift that offered time-and-a-half premium pay. My goal wasn't just to be comfortable. My goal was total, undeniable escape. I was quietly building an application, my own startup venture called Fintra Pro. It was designed to be a high-level personal finance management tool that used advanced machine learning algorithms to predict user overspending and provide real-time, preventative fraud alerts. But building solid tech infrastructure takes massive amounts of capital, and I absolutely refused to take on predatory venture capital loans that would strip me of my equity. So, I essentially became a ghost in my own life to fund it myself. I lived in a tiny, aggressively drafty studio apartment on the outskirts of the city that always smelled faintly of old cabbage and industrial cleaning supplies. My diet was a masterclass in poverty nutrition. It consisted primarily of generic, store-brand peanut butter spread on stale wheat bread and massive, tasteless batches of cheap pasta that I would meal prep and eat for 5 days straight. I drank tap water exclusively. I rotated through the exact same 3 practical, unbranded blouses for the office, meticulously mending the seams with a needle and thread whenever they ripped. I skipped concerts, I skipped networking dinners, I skipped dating entirely. Every single spare dollar I earned, every bonus, every tax refund, was funneled directly into my savings portfolio. And while I was practically starving myself to build a technological empire, I had to watch Morgan live a life of fully funded, absolute delusion. Morgan, who was 4 years older than me, had decided early on that traditional employment was beneath her aesthetic. She bounced around endlessly, declaring herself a lifestyle influencer 1 year, a boutique fashion consultant the next, and a freelance luxury travel blogger after that. The glaring problem was, Morgan never actually generated any revenue. She just spent money. I vividly remember sitting in my freezing apartment, eating cold pasta, and watching her Instagram stories. I would see her sipping $300 bottles of champagne on a rented yacht in Cabo San Lucas, or unboxing thousands of dollars worth of designer handbags in her trendy, overpriced downtown apartment. She financed her entirely fake lifestyle with high-interest premium credit cards until they completely maxed out and the accounts were frozen. And when the aggressive collection agencies started calling her phone 10 times a day, who bailed her out? Our parents. They remortgaged their cars, They dipped dangerously into their retirement funds. They took out high-interest personal loans, all to protect Morgan from facing the actual consequences of her own financial recklessness. Growing up in that house, I learned a very hard, very cynical lesson. In our family, financial responsibility was punished with neglect, and entitled incompetence was rewarded with massive infusions of cash. I knew, deep in my core, that if I wanted a secure future, I had to protect my money like a junkyard dog guarding a bone. The deep-seated paranoia that ultimately saved my life and my fortune started exactly 1 week before the infamous confession in the living room. It was a perfectly typical Tuesday afternoon at my corporate office. I was taking a rare, 15-minute mental health coffee break in the sterile company cafeteria, scrolling aimlessly through social media to rest my eyes from staring at code, when Morgan's latest post popped up at the top of my feed. It was a heavily filtered, highly staged selfie of her looking dramatically melancholic while staring out the window of an expensive artisanal coffee shop. The caption beneath the photo was a long, incredibly passive-aggressive rant designed to garner maximum sympathy. I read it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It read, "It is so incredibly exhausting trying to build a beautiful, stable life when you have selfish family members who hoard all their success and leave their own flesh and blood scraping by in the dirt. Some people love watching their bank accounts grow more than they love supporting their siblings' dreams." It's toxic individualism at its finest. Followed by a broken heart emoji, a crying face emoji, and a money bag emoji. The comment section was an absolute echo chamber of enablement. It was full of her equally delusional friends offering sympathy, validating her completely fake struggle, and telling her she deserved the world. A cold, heavy dread washed over my entire body. I didn't just feel annoyed by her typical drama, I felt actively hunted. She wasn't just complaining to the internet. She was publicly justifying something to herself. She was painting me as the villainous, greedy sister so she wouldn't feel an ounce of guilt about taking what was rightfully mine. I slid my phone across the smooth surface of the cafeteria table to my best friend and coworker, Riley. Riley was a senior network security analyst. She was incredibly sharp, deeply cynical, and fiercely protective of me. She knew all about my family dynamic. Riley scanned the lengthy post, her eyes narrowing sharply as she chewed thoughtfully on a piece of celery. She looked up at me, her expression completely dead serious. "Blair, this isn't just standard entitlement. This screams intent. She's actively setting a public narrative. She's convincing herself and your parents that you basically owe her your money because you have more of it." I sighed heavily, rubbing my temples as a headache started to form. "I know. She's been relentlessly begging our parents for money to buy some ridiculous house, but I know for a fact their credit is tapped out. I'm terrified she's going to pressure them into asking me for a massive loan that she will never, ever repay." Riley leaned closer across the table, lowering her voice so the nearby tables couldn't hear. "Don't just sit there and wait for the hammer to drop. Protect yourself right now. You told me your parents still have that old medical power of attorney access to your main banking portal from your knee surgery, right? You need to set up a decoy immediately. Move a very convincing, substantial amount of money over to a new account. Make it look exactly like your entire life savings. If she gets desperate, if she manipulates them into doing something crazy behind your back, they'll hit the decoy. They'll target the wrong vault, and your real assets will be invisible." At first, sitting in that bright cafeteria, I thought she was being way too dramatic. My parents were massive enablers, yes, but actual thieves? Stealing tens of thousands of dollars from their own daughter without asking? But then I thought about Morgan's extensive history of destruction. I thought about the thousands of dollars my parents had literally burned to keep her happy and quiet. The suggestion suddenly clicked into place. Paranoia wasn't crazy if they were actually out to get you. That very afternoon, I went straight back to my desk, put my noise-canceling headphones on, and completely ignored my corporate coding assignments. Surrounded by the low, steady hum of office keyboards and chatter, I meticulously engineered the digital trap that would eventually save my life's work. I opened a secure browser and logged into my primary banking portal. Over the past 5 years, my relentless, Agonizing saving habits, combined with some incredibly lucky, aggressive investments in emerging tech stocks, had ballooned my actual net worth to an astonishing $400,000. It was life-changing money. It was my startup capital, my ultimate safety net, my entire future encapsulated in digital digits. I navigated through the menus and opened a secondary, high-yield savings account within the exact same banking institution. Then I initiated a wire transfer. I moved exactly $85,000 from my main investment portfolio into this new, entirely empty account. To make it look perfectly authentic, I added a few $100s of random, varied amounts transferred from checking over the next 2 days to simulate accrued interest and regular deposits. I made the account look actively, but naturally maintained. Next came the most vital part of the operation, the digital camouflage. I meticulously adjusted my banking dashboard's display settings. Using the platform's advanced portfolio management tools, I hid my massive, primary investment accounts entirely from the main overview screen. Unless you knew the specific, secondary dual authentication PIN required to unhide them, the main dashboard simply didn't show that those funds existed at all. If someone, say a desperate father, logged into my profile using my old passwords or the lingering medical access token, the only thing they would see was an everyday checking account holding a few $1,000s for rent and groceries. And this new savings account sitting proudly with exactly $85,000. It looked exactly like the impressive, but entirely plausible, life savings of a hardworking 28-year-old software engineer. It looked like absolutely everything I had in the world. As the final confirmation screen popped up, finalizing the massive transfer, a heavy, suffocating wave of guilt washed over me. I was actively setting a financial trap for my own parents. It felt deeply wrong, almost dirty, like I was violating the most basic rules of human decency. I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer screen, wondering if I was letting my intense financial anxiety turn me into a paranoid monster. But then I remembered the smug entitlement radiating from Morgan's Instagram post. I remembered the 5 years of choking down stale peanut butter sandwiches while she vacationed in luxury resorts on my parents' dwindling dime. Testing family loyalty shouldn't ever be necessary, but I wasn't testing them. I was building a necessary firewall. If they were truly good, respectful people, the decoy account would sit there untouched for the rest of my life. But if trouble came knocking, I would be ready. I logged out, closed the browser, and went back to writing code. If you are enjoying the story so far, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling us what city you are watching from. Every comment helps push this video to more people. Thank you so much. Let's jump back to the present. The night of the confession, after I left my parents' house laughing like an absolute lunatic, I drove straight back to my apartment in the city. The rain was coming down in heavy, relentless sheets, blurring the streetlights into smeared streaks of yellow and red against my windshield. The rhythmic thumping of the wipers matched my racing heartbeat. Despite my obvious victory in the living room, despite knowing my real money was safe, I couldn't shake a deep, gnawing sense of unease. Something about their pathetic story didn't add up. Morgan buying a house for stability? That was a hilarious contradiction in terms. Morgan didn't know the meaning of the word stability. She couldn't keep a low-maintenance houseplant alive, let alone manage annual property taxes, home insurance, and a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. She was a creature of instant gratification. I paced my small apartment for an hour, completely unable to sleep. My mind was spinning, trying to find the missing puzzle piece. Then, my eyes landed on the tall bookshelf in the corner of my living room. Sitting on the very bottom shelf, gathering a thick layer of dust, was an old iPad. Years ago, I had given it to my dad so he could play digital solitaire, but I had originally set the device up using a shared family Apple ID. Most people don't realize just how sticky and intrusive Apple's cloud ecosystem really is. Even if you manually turn off most syncing features, sometimes, if the settings get reset during a routine software update, iMessages will silently begin mirroring across all devices sharing that same central cloud account. Curiosity completely overrode any lingering sense of privacy or moral high ground I had left. I grabbed the iPad, plugged the charger into the wall, waited agonizingly for it to boot up, and tapped the bright green messaging icon. It took a moment for the device to connect to the Wi-Fi and load the history. When it finally did, my blood ran absolutely cold. Sitting right there at the top of the inbox was a heavily active group chat between my dad, Morgan, and a phone number I instantly recognized as Trevor's. Trevor was Morgan's boyfriend of about 6 months. He was a slick, incredibly fast-talking guy who always wore way too much designer cologne and constantly bragged at family dinners about being a visionary real estate entrepreneur. I had always thought he was a standard-issue sleazeball, but looking at this chat, I hadn't realized he was a full-blown predator. I started scrolling up, reading the text messages exchanged over the 3 days prior to the living room ambush. The messages laid out the entire conspiracy in terrifyingly plain, undeniable English. Morgan, the seller won't wait through the weekend. We need 80 grand in cash by Friday, or we lose the Lakefront villa entirely. Trevor, it's an absolute goldmine, babe. We do a quick, cheap cosmetic flip on this property, paint, new fixtures, and we can list it for 40% higher in 2 months. It's easy, guaranteed money. Have you talked to your parents about the cash? Dad, we don't have that kind of liquid cash, kids. You know this. Our credit is maxed out from the last loan we took for Morgan's boutique idea. Morgan, Dad, what about Blair's bank account? The one you used when she was stuck in the hospital? She has almost 100 grand just rotting in there doing nothing but earning tiny interest. We are family. She would want to help us secure our future. Trevor, Mr. H, think of it as a temporary, high-yield bridge loan. We pull the funds, secure the property deed, flip the house, and put the money right back into Blair's account before she even checks her monthly statement. She won't even notice it was gone if we move fast. Family funds for family gains. I stared at the glowing digital screen, feeling physically sick to my stomach. This wasn't a desperate, tearful plea to help poor Morgan find a stable, forever home. It was a highly coordinated, premeditated financial heist. They were using my life savings as seed capital for Trevor's incredibly risky real estate gambling. They had treated me like a clueless, silent piggy bank. The next morning, I didn't even bother calling in sick. I just didn't go into the office. I sat at my kitchen island with a massive, steaming cup of black coffee and my laptop open in front of me. The sadness had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I wasn't just going to confront them with printed text messages. I was going to thoroughly bury them in the undeniable reality of their own lies. I needed hard, legal proof that this was a speculative flip and not a residential home purchase. I opened the county's public property records portal online. Thanks to a subtle, bragging flex from Morgan at a family dinner a few weeks ago, I knew the general area of the lakefront property she had been aggressively obsessing over. I typed the parameters into the search database. It didn't take long to find it. There it was. A sprawling, somewhat outdated villa located right on the water in Lake Geneva. According to the public ledger, the property deed had been officially transferred exactly 5 days ago. The purchase price was listed at $120,000, but that wasn't what made my stomach drop into my shoes. What made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached was that on a highly popular, national real estate website, that exact same address was already listed as an active property for sale. The photos on the listing were clearly taken the day they bought it. They showed the same ugly, outdated kitchen cabinets, but the listing description boasted wildly about unlimited investor potential and highly motivated sellers looking for a quick close. The new asking price was $170,000. That was a markup of $50,000. They hadn't even moved a single piece of furniture into the house. They hadn't spent a single night there. They were trying to flip it immediately for a massive profit using my stolen money to float the transaction. I picked up my phone, took a deep breath to steady my heart rate, and dialed the number for the listing agent displayed prominently on the webpage. I cleared my throat and put on my best, most authoritative corporate voice. "Hi there," I said smoothly when the agent answered the phone. "I'm calling to inquire about the lakefront villa listed on Shoreline Drive. I see it literally just hit the market this morning. Oh, absolutely, the real estate agent chirped, clearly eager for a fast bite on a new listing. It's a fantastic piece of property. Incredible, unobstructed water views. Are you looking for a primary residence or an investment opportunity? I'm actually an independent investor looking for a quick turnaround project, I lied smoothly, leaning into the persona. I noticed in the public history that it was just sold very recently. Can you tell me why it's back on the market so incredibly fast? Is there something structurally wrong with the foundation or the roof? The agent chuckled, completely oblivious to who she was actually talking to. Oh no, nothing like that at all. The structure is perfectly sound. The current owner bought it purely as a speculative investment vehicle. She's a young woman, doing a quick cosmetic flip with her partner. She actually mentioned she had significant family backing her venture to secure the cash quickly without dealing with bank underwriting. They just want a really fast sale to cash out the equity and move on to the next project. Highly motivated sellers. I thanked the agent politely, told her I would be in touch if I wanted to schedule a viewing, and hung up the phone. My pulse was pounding so loudly in my ears I could barely hear the hum of the refrigerator. It was undeniably confirmed. Morgan hadn't needed a home. She had used my money, deeply manipulated our parents' sense of guilt, and lied to absolutely everyone just so she and Trevor could play pretend real estate moguls with zero personal risk. The betrayal wasn't just deep, it was terrifyingly calculated. And as I sat there in my quiet apartment, looking at the public listing of the villa my stolen money had purchased, I made a final, unbreakable decision. I wasn't just going to get my money back. I was going to let them choke on the reality of what they had done. I was going to burn their little fantasy to the ground. Armed with the printed public property records and the screenshots of the old iPad text messages, I drove back to Neepville that very same evening. The traffic was remarkably light, which gave me entirely too much time to think about the absolute massacre I was about to unleash. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. I let myself in through the front door without knocking. My parents were sitting at the dining room table, picking at a meager dinner of leftover casserole. When they saw me, their faces completely drained of color. They probably thought I had come to beg for my money back, or maybe to cry. I did neither. I walked straight up to the dining table and dropped the thick manila folder of printed evidence right onto the placemat between them. The heavy slap of the paper against the wood made my mom physically jump. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice a single decibel. I just coldly narrated exactly what I had found. I told them about the iPads syncing their group messages. I told them about Trevor coaching them to steal the funds quickly. And then, I laid out the most damning piece of evidence, the printed real estate listing proving that Morgan was actively trying to flip the Lakefront villa for a $50,000 profit without ever intending to live there. My dad stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. My mom started to cry, those familiar, manipulative tears that I had grown immune to. She tried to stammer out an excuse, claiming that Trevor had assured them it was a guaranteed investment and that the quick profit would help Morgan finally become financially independent. But as I stood there, looking at the financial documents I had pulled, I noticed something else. Something I had missed in my initial blind rage. The purchase price of the villa was $120,000. Even with closing costs, my stolen $85,000 wouldn't have been enough to secure the property outright or cover the immediate, expensive renovations Trevor was planning. I looked dead into my father's eyes and asked him where the rest of the money came from. The silence that followed was suffocating. My dad finally broke, his voice barely a whisper. He confessed that my savings weren't enough. Trevor had pushed them, manipulated their desire to be the heroes of Morgan's life. So, my parents had quietly gone to a local community bank and taken out a second mortgage on their fully paid-off Neepville home. They had borrowed an additional $30,000 against their own equity to hand over to my sister's boyfriend. I felt a cold wave of absolute horror wash over me. I demanded to know the terms of the loan. My dad, looking like a man walking to the gallows, admitted it was a variable rate loan with massive prepayment penalties and a staggering monthly installment of over $2,000. I did the math aloud for them right then and there. I narrated their impending doom. Between their fixed pensions and Social Security, their total monthly income was roughly $3,200. After paying this new, fraudulent second mortgage, they would have less than $800 a month left to cover groceries, property taxes, home insurance, utilities, and their rising medical bills. They had literally signed up for financial suicide. And worse, to even qualify for that second mortgage on a fixed income, Trevor had coached them to exaggerate their assets on the application. They had committed federal mortgage fraud. They had risked federal prison to buy Morgan a house she was trying to sell 5 days later. I didn't say another word. I just turned around and walked out, leaving them to sit in the ruins of their own catastrophic stupidity. I drove back to my apartment in Chicago feeling entirely numb. I had always known my family was deeply dysfunctional, but watching my parents willingly strap a financial bomb to their own chests just to please Morgan was a level of sickness I couldn't comprehend. I ordered some incredibly overpriced takeout food, sat on my sofa, and tried to focus my mind on anything else. I needed to formulate a concrete legal plan. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. It wasn't a text message. It was a high-priority push notification from my primary banking application. The alert flashed bright red across my lock screen. Suspicious login attempt detected. I froze, the takeout container slipping from my hands. The notification provided detailed information. Someone was trying to breach my primary account. Not the decoy account that they had already drained, but my real, hidden portfolio. The one containing $400,000 in carefully managed investments. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The system had automatically blocked the attempt thanks to the complex two-factor authentication protocol I had established, but the sheer audacity of the attempt left me breathless. I grabbed my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I logged into my bank's advanced security dashboard. The security logs displayed a terrifyingly clear narrative. Over the past 45 minutes, there had been multiple, aggressive probes trying to bypass the password screen. They were using brute force methods, repeatedly entering variations of my old childhood pet names, my birthday, and old street addresses. It was sloppy, desperate work. I immediately understood what was happening. Morgan and Trevor had secured the Lakefront villa, but anyone who has ever watched a single home improvement show knows that flipping a house always costs significantly more than the initial estimate. They had likely uncovered structural issues, or maybe Trevor just wanted to install a luxury kitchen he couldn't afford. The $85,000 they stole from my decoy account, plus the $30,000 from my parents' fraudulent mortgage, wasn't enough to cover the bleeding. The well had run dry. And instead of selling the property at a loss to recoup what they could, they had decided to come back for more. Trevor, believing that if I had one secret savings account, I might have another, was actively trying to hack into my digital life to steal whatever was left. They weren't just entitled anymore. They had crossed the threshold into active, malicious cybercrime. They viewed me as an endless, exploitable resource, and they were willing to commit federal offenses to drain me completely dry. I didn't panic. Panic is an emotion for people who don't have a plan. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Riley. Even though it was past midnight on a Wednesday, she answered on the second ring. I didn't even say hello. I just told her that the trap had been sprung, but the rats were currently trying to chew their way through the floorboards to get to the main vault. I told her I needed her specific set of skills immediately. Riley simply told me to put a pot of extremely strong coffee on, and she was at my door 20 minutes later, carrying a heavy black backpack full of network diagnostic equipment. My tiny kitchen was immediately transformed into a makeshift cybersecurity war room. We pushed the empty takeout containers aside, wiped down the island counter, and set up our laptops side by side under the harsh glare of the overhead pendant lights. Riley was entirely in her element, her fingers flying across her keyboard with a speed that always intimidated me. "All right," Riley muttered, her eyes locked on her screen as lines of complex code cascaded downward. "Let's see exactly how stupid your sister's boyfriend really is." Using advanced network monitoring tools, We began dissecting the raw data logs provided by my bank's security interface. Riley narrated her process to me as she worked, turning abstract digital footprints into undeniable, physical evidence. She explained that whoever was trying to hack me wasn't using a sophisticated proxy server or a heavy-duty virtual private network. They were acting with the sloppy, arrogant confidence of an amateur who believed they would never get caught. We examined the raw timestamps. The aggressive login attempts had started exactly 2 hours after I had left my parents' house in Neepville. That timeline painted a very clear picture. My panicked parents had undoubtedly called Morgan the second I walked out the door, warning her that I knew everything about the flip and the second mortgage. That phone call hadn't triggered remorse in Morgan and Trevor, it had triggered pure desperation. Within an hour, Riley had successfully isolated the incoming IP address. She cross-referenced the geolocation data. The digital pings weren't coming from Neepville. They were bouncing off a local internet service provider hub located less than 2 miles away from Morgan's luxury apartment complex in the city. But Riley didn't stop there. She dug deeper into the metadata, extracting the specific device fingerprint, a unique digital signature created by the hacker's operating system, screen resolution, and browser type. We compared that fingerprint against the historical login data from the family Apple ID on the old iPad. It was an absolute, undisputed match. The device attempting to illegally breach my $400,000 portfolio was the exact same device Trevor had used to text my father about stealing the initial funds. We spent the next 3 hours methodically compiling a massive, airtight digital dossier. I exported the bank's security logs into secure, watermarked PDF files. I took high-resolution screenshots of the failed login alerts, highlighting the specific error codes that proved they were guessing passwords based on my personal family history. Riley generated a comprehensive geographic map tracing the IP logs directly to Morgan's neighborhood. We even included the printed transcripts of the iPad text messages, showing a clear, undeniable pattern of premeditated financial exploitation. By 4 a.m, my eyes were burning from staring at the screens, but the adrenaline pulsing through my veins kept me wide awake. I looked down at the thick stack of printed evidence and the encrypted flash drive sitting on my kitchen counter. We had them. We had absolute proof of unauthorized access, conversion of funds, and attempted cyber intrusion. The narrative was no longer just about a toxic family dispute over borrowed money. It was a documented, aggressively prosecuted felony waiting to happen. The victim phase of my life was officially over. I was now the architect of their absolute destruction. The very next morning, operating on less than 2 hours of sleep and entirely too much caffeine, I put on my sharpest, most intimidating corporate suit and took a cab to the financial district. I wasn't going to handle this through angry text messages or dramatic family interventions. I was going to handle this with the brutal, emotionless machinery of the legal system. I had scheduled an emergency consultation with Mr. Gallagher, a highly recommended, notoriously ruthless civil litigation attorney who specialized in complex financial disputes and asset recovery. His office, located on the 40th floor of a sleek glass skyscraper, smelled of expensive leather and polished mahogany. He was a man who clearly didn't waste time on pleasantries. I sat across from his massive desk and simply slid the thick manila folder and the encrypted flash drive across the polished wood. I narrated the entire sequence of events with cold precision. I detailed the initial unauthorized withdrawal of the $85,000 using outdated medical permissions. I explained the discovery of the real estate flip scheme through the iPad messages. And finally, I walked him through the forensic evidence Riley and I had compiled, proving Trevor's midnight attempt to hack into my primary investment portfolio. Mr. Gallagher reviewed the materials in absolute silence for nearly 20 minutes. He flipped through the printed IP logs, read the text message transcripts, and examined the property deed records. When he finally looked up, there was a sharp, predatory gleam in his eye. He told me, in very clear, unambiguous terms, that I had handed him a legally airtight masterpiece. He explained the charges we could bring against them. The initial theft constituted civil conversion of funds and breach of fiduciary duty. Because they had used electronic banking portals across state lines to transfer the money to Wisconsin, there were strong elements of wire fraud. And Trevor's sloppy midnight hacking attempt fell squarely under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. We discussed our offensive strategy in exhaustive detail. Mr. Gallagher would immediately draft aggressive demand letters to Morgan, Trevor, and my parents, formally outlining the exact financial damages and threatening immediate, catastrophic legal escalation if the funds were not returned. He agreed to take the case on a contingency fee basis, meaning his payment would come out of the settlement, which assured me he was confident we would win. He explained the timeline for filing the lawsuit in the county circuit court and detailed the aggressive tactics he would use to legally freeze all of their remaining assets, including placing a lien on the Lakefront villa so they couldn't sell it to escape the debt. I signed the retainer agreement right there on his desk. The ink felt permanent. The resolve in my chest hardened into solid steel. This was no longer just about recovering my stolen money. It was about teaching a brutal, lasting lesson about consequences. They had operated their entire lives under the assumption that family ties were a free pass for exploitation. I was about to show them that crossing my boundaries carried a price tag they could never afford to pay. Just as Mr. Gallagher was shaking my hand to conclude the meeting, my cell phone rang. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. I stepped out into the hallway and pressed the phone to my ear. Through a veil of hysterical, hyperventilating sobs, my mother choked out the words. My dad had collapsed on the kitchen floor in Neepville. Half of his face was drooping, and his speech was entirely garbled. The paramedics had already loaded him into the back of an ambulance. The drive from downtown Chicago to Rush University Medical Center felt like navigating through a surreal, suffocating nightmare. The sterile, fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridors was blinding. I found my mother sitting in a plastic chair outside the neurology intensive care unit. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. Her hands were shaking violently as she clutched a crumpled tissue. The attending emergency room doctor eventually pulled us aside into a quiet alcove. He spoke in that low, measured tone that medical professionals use when delivering bad news. He explained that my dad had suffered a minor ischemic stroke, likely caused by a blood clot triggered by chronic, unmanaged hypertension. However, the doctor made a point to emphasize that the stroke had been severely accelerated by an acute, massive spike in psychological stress. My dad was stable, hooked up to an array of terrifyingly loud monitors and intravenous drips, but the next 48 hours were going to be absolutely critical for his long-term recovery. I stood there in the hallway, letting the medical terminology wash over me. A heavy, dark wave of guilt tried to claw its way up my throat. My internal monologue was screaming at me. Was this my fault? Did my confrontation the night before, dropping those financial documents on the dining table, push his blood pressure over the edge? Was my pursuit of justice going to kill my father? I leaned against the cool plaster wall, closing my eyes and forcing myself to breathe. I had to separate the emotion from the facts. I had to think like an engineer, breaking down the sequence of events. I hadn't forced my dad to steal my money. I hadn't forced him to secretly remortgage his home at a predatory interest rate. I hadn't forced him to lie on a federal loan application. Trevor had manipulated them, Morgan had ruthlessly demanded the money, and my parents had willingly chosen to sacrifice their own safety and my future to appease her. Their own greed, their own blind enablement, had created the crushing pressure cooker that caused this stroke. I was simply the one who held up the mirror and forced them to look at the devastating reality of their choices. I refused to let their medical emergency manipulate me into abandoning my boundaries. I pushed the guilt down, locking it away in a dark corner of my mind. I needed to stay incredibly strong, because I knew exactly who was going to walk through those hospital doors next. Exactly 1 hour later, the elevator doors at the end of the hallway chimed, and Morgan burst into the waiting area. Trevor was trailing right behind her, looking nervous and out of place. Morgan was wearing oversized designer sunglasses despite being indoors, and her makeup was dramatically streaked, though I heavily suspected it was performance art rather than genuine grief. She stomped down the hallway, her heels clicking loudly against the linoleum. She didn't even bother asking the nurses about our dad's actual condition. She marched straight up to me, her face contorted in a mask of righteous fury. "This is all your fault, Blair," Morgan hissed loudly, completely ignoring the quiet zone signs on the walls. "If you hadn't come over last night and started a massive fight over a stupid loan, he wouldn't be in a hospital bed right now. The stress of your absolute selfishness put him here." I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had stolen from me, lied to me, and was currently attempting to flip a luxury property using my savings, while having the absolute audacity to call me selfish. The last shred of familial obligation inside my chest evaporated into thin air. I didn't engage in a screaming match in the hallway. I simply turned and walked into the small, private family consultation lounge nearby, motioning for Morgan and Trevor to follow me. My mom stayed outside, too paralyzed by fear to move. The lounge was cramped, smelling of stale coffee and old magazines. The moment the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind us, closing us off from the hospital staff, Morgan started up again. "Since you caused this disaster," she demanded, crossing her arms over her chest defensively, "you are going to pay the medical deductibles. Dad's insurance isn't going to cover the entire ICU stay. You have to empty whatever tiny amount of money you have left in your checking account to fix this. It's the absolute least you can do, since you clearly have no future left anyway." Trevor nodded in agreement from the corner, attempting to look imposing. "She's right, Blair. You need to step up for your family. We are dealing with real estate investments right now. Our cash is tied up in escrow. We can't liquidate to cover his hospital bills." I let them talk. I let them dig their own graves with their incredible arrogance. I took a slow, deep breath, centering myself. Then I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I bypassed the lock screen and opened my primary banking application. But this time, I didn't open the decoy account. I typed in the secondary, hidden dual authentication PIN. The screen flashed, loading the actual, unfiltered reality of my financial portfolio. I turned the glowing screen around and shoved it directly into Morgan's face. She flinched backward slightly, her eyes naturally dropping to the large green numbers displayed at the top of the screen. I watched the exact moment her brain processed the figures. The color completely drained out of her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under the fluorescent lights. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The total balance displayed across my diversified accounts was exactly $400,000. "That," I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly whisper, "is the money you thought you were stealing. The $85,000 you and Dad illegally wired to Wisconsin was a decoy account. I set it up the exact same day you posted that pathetic, whiny rant on Instagram complaining about my success. I knew you were coming for me. I knew you would view my savings as your personal slush fund." Trevor stepped forward, trying to peer at the screen, his bravado entirely shattered. "A decoy," he stammered, his eyes wide. That's impossible." We checked the balances. "You checked the bait, Trevor," I snapped, turning my cold gaze onto him. "You took the bait. But that wasn't enough for you, was it? You realized house flipping actually costs real money, and your stolen down payment wasn't going to cover the luxury renovations. So, you got desperate." I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila folder Mr. Gallagher had helped me prep. I tossed it onto the small coffee table between us. "Those are the IP logs," I narrated, enjoying the absolute terror blooming in their eyes. "Those are the digital device fingerprints proving that you, Trevor, attempted to hack into my primary banking portal at midnight last night from Morgan's apartment. It's a federal cyber intrusion. Mr. Gallagher, my civil litigation attorney, filed the lawsuit this morning. We are formally charging all of you with conversion of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and cyber fraud. The court will freeze the Lakefront villa by tomorrow." Morgan stumbled backward, bumping into the wall. "Blair, please," she begged, her arrogant facade entirely gone. "You can't do this. We'll go to jail. We'll lose everything." "You already lost everything the second you logged into my account," I said smoothly. I picked up my purse, walked to the door, and opened it. I looked back at them one last time. Don't ever contact me again. Speak only to my lawyer. But Judge Bennett, a notoriously strict magistrate who handled complex financial disputes, was having absolutely none of it. She denied every single motion to dismiss, citing the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence we provided. During the remote depositions, the defendants fell apart. Mr. Gallagher was a surgeon with his questions. He cornered Morgan into admitting she had never intended to live in the villa. He shredded Trevor's defense that the hacking attempt was just a system error, forcing him to look at the printed IP logs tracing the breach directly to his laptop. My parents, looking entirely broken, mumbled through tears that they had just wanted to help Morgan find stability, further proving the manipulation. When the actual bench trial commenced in early spring, it lasted exactly 2 days. Mr. Gallagher laid out the narrative flawlessly. He showed the court the medical access forms, the unauthorized wire transfer, the text messages proving premeditation, and the forensic network logs proving the attempted cyber theft. He brought in a certified forensic accountant who quantified my exact financial damages, including the compound interest I had lost by not having that $85,000 invested in the market. The defense pleaded for mitigation, begging the judge to consider the emotional toll on the family and the fact that my dad had suffered a stroke. They literally tried to use the medical crisis they caused as a shield against the consequences. Judge Bennett ruled directly from the bench after only a short deliberation. I will never forget the sound of her voice echoing in the wood-paneled courtroom. She stated that the court found incredibly clear, indisputable evidence of conversion, fraud, and severe emotional distress caused by calculated deception. The final judgment was a devastating blow to them. The judge ordered full restitution of the original $85,000. On top of that, she awarded me punitive damages of $65,000 to punish the malicious nature of the hack, along with mandating that they cover 100% of my extensive legal costs. The total judgment against them was over $150,000. But the legal victory was only the first domino to fall. While we were tied up in court proceedings, the national macroeconomic environment shifted violently. The Federal Reserve aggressively hiked interest rates to combat inflation, pushing average mortgage rates well above 7%. The previously hot housing market froze overnight. Property values in the Lake Geneva area dropped by nearly 20% in a matter of weeks. Morgan's overpriced, half-renovated lakefront villa officially became a toxic, unsellable asset, trapping them in a financial nightmare of their own making. The post-judgment enforcement unfolded with absolutely brutal speed. Morgan and Trevor, now legally jointly liable for a massive court judgment they couldn't pay, while simultaneously drowning in holding costs for an unsellable property, had no other choice. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. I watched the public filings from the comfort of my office. The bankruptcy trustees systematically seized their cars, froze their remaining checking accounts, and completely liquidated whatever meager assets they had left. Their credit scores tanked below 500, effectively barring them from renting a decent apartment or securing any type of loan for the next 10 years. Trevor's reputation as a real estate entrepreneur was utterly destroyed. When the civil fraud judgment became public record, his few clients vanished, and his career dissolved into nothing. The fallout for my parents was equally heartbreaking, yet entirely inevitable. Because they had exaggerated their income to secure that fraudulent second mortgage, they couldn't keep up with the massive monthly installments on their fixed retirement pensions. They missed 3 payments in a row, triggering aggressive default notices from the community bank. The foreclosure proceedings advanced quickly and uncontested. The bank repossessed the Neepville house, the house I grew up in, the house where we celebrated holidays, and sold it at a public auction for pennies on the dollar just to recoup the bad loan. The stroke aftercare added incredible insult to injury. The required physical therapy, the speech sessions, and the daily medications racked up massive, uncovered medical bills that completely wiped out whatever tiny savings my parents had left. Destitute and homeless, they were forced to transition into a bleak, state-subsidized assisted living facility. They lived in a tiny unit on a strictly fixed income, their days limited to communal meals and watching television. Meanwhile, as their lives burned to ash, my life exploded into success. A year after the lawsuit concluded, my startup application, Findraw Pro, officially launched and massively exceeded all market expectations. The user base hit 15,000 within the first month. The premium fraud detection features, ironically inspired by my own family's betrayal, became the app's biggest selling point. We secured our first major round of venture capital funding, allowing me to move into a stunning, highly secure luxury condo in the heart of downtown Chicago. I completely severed the dead branches of my family tree. I changed my phone number, established aggressive email filters that automatically deleted anything from them, and ensured the security desk at my building knew never to let them up. Sometimes, the facility nurses would try to call me on behalf of my mother, but I always hung up. Occasionally, a package of old childhood photos would arrive, marked return to sender. I threw them straight into the incinerator room without opening them. The void left by my family felt deliberate and entirely necessary. I realized that true family respects your boundaries. They don't actively breach them for personal gain. I had chosen self-preservation over suffocating guilt, and the result was absolute freedom. So, looking back at the wreckage they created for themselves, the bankruptcy, the foreclosures, the state-funded assisted living facility. Am I wrong for walking away and never looking back? Should I have shown mercy to the family that was willing to sacrifice my entire future for a lakefront villa? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.